All right. Well, thank y'all all. I'm kind of surprised at the response for this. You never know with these tours, but generally, you know, when we talk about herbaceous perennials, we get a big crowd, and when we talk about woody stuff, not so much a lot of times. So I'm really glad all of y'all are here. I may change up a little bit on the fly because the larger group we have means we can't go on some of the smaller paths, but that is okay. I'd rather have a big group and make some changes. So hollies are a pretty big group. Depending on your taxonomist of choice, there is about, hold on, I wrote it down because I'll never remember, about 480 species, give or take, hollies. They range, they can be deciduous or evergreen. We often think of the evergreen ones, but awful lot of deciduous ones as well. They're trees and shrubs mostly, but there are some climbers, especially when you get into more of the subtropical regions. They do range from temperate to subtropic all over the world. There's a lot of them in China and Asia. There's a fair number here in North America. They range down into South America. Europe really just has the one native one, Ilex aquifolium, that's known as the English holly. And that goes down into northern Africa, and then there's another African species. There's an Australian species. So really a wide distribution, which implies a pretty old lineage. In the family that they're in is the Aquifoliaceae family, and currently they consider hollies, the genus Ilex, to be the only genus in that family. There have been sometimes taxonomists switch them in and out. There's a North American genus, Nemapanthus, that's been moved back into Ilex. So they kind of, they move all around. You never know where the taxonomists are going to end up. That's how you get tenure. So currently there's just the genus. Ilex is, the name comes from actually the Latin name for an oak, the holm oak in Europe, Quercus ilex, which can have a bit of a spiny leaf, kind of thick textured evergreen leaf, is where the name Ilex comes from. Most people think it goes the other way, that the oak is named for the hollies, but it's not. It is an important plant. It's been used, the wood of a lot of ilex have been used in a lot of tools for specific purposes. There's a couple of species that have been used for either rituals or for their relatively small caffeine content. The one that a lot of people know is Yaupon holly, Ilex vomitoria, that people tell you is poisonous and it'll make you sick. All hollies are a little bit poisonous, but you would have to be really hungry or thirsty to have enough holly berries or drink enough Ilex vomitoria tea to really get sick. The one that's becoming really popular right now is Ilex paraguayensis. You may know it as yerba mate. It's a slightly caffeinated drink made from the South American Ilex paraguayensis, and it's all the rage with hipsters. Have your yerba mate tea. There's about, I don't know, I was giving a talk at a Holly Society meeting, I think in 2017, and I think they had 3 different groups who were making, and canning and bottling yerba mate commercially. I don't know how well they're doing, but they were doing it. It tastes much like, green tea that I'm drinking. It's, dirty leaf water. That's what it is. Depending on your affinity for dirty leaf water, it tastes better or worse than others. So that's pretty good. Some other, I mentioned that holly was one of the aspects, the winter aspect of the Sun King in some pagan religion, which I don't know. Depending on your age and interest in young adult literature, it is the wood that was the material for Harry Potter's wand. Just in case you weren't know. My daughter let me know that last night. I have read the books, but I don't have that committed to memory. So a lot going on with hollies. The ones we grow, we tend to think of them as evergreen shrubs, but we're going to look at some different forms out here. I tried with this tour, tried to hit a lot of different kind of forms and types of hollies, both kind of broadly in terms of their genera, but also there's a few that we'll go by real quickly and look at 3 different ones that are all the same species. All, if you were to say, you'd say they're gold leaf Japanese hollies, and you see what kind of difference there can be within something as, you know, kind of narrowly defined as gold Ilex crenata. So we're going to go ahead and go. It looks like we've got a rental coming out right now, so we'll have to squeeze down the path with them and block them. We'll teach them a little bit about hollies. As always, I always tell people this: if you have experiences with these plants, please pipe up while we're talking. I always ask people if there's any comments or questions. I love when we get comments from people. I love questions as well. I will forestall this question. The spinier and more leathery the leaf is, the less chance deer will eat it. None of them are deer proof. They are just more or less deer resistant. I will show you one that shows up on a lot of lists of deer resistant hollies. I think it got on a list at one point and just keeps getting put on lists because it's not a very widely available one. But I will point that out because maybe it is especially resistant. I don't know. But love to hear from people as we talk. If you see something else as we're walking, you know, feel free to ask me about it. I'm happy to talk about things besides hollies as well. Now, if you were a nursery and wanted to make actual money, probably what you could grow more of down here in the southeast than just about anything else are Japanese hollies, Ilex crenata. This is one called Drops of Gold. Generally, if you want to make money, you got to grow plain green ones, you know, and you can grow Hellerized, which are little things that only grow about 2 feet tall by 3 feet wide. You can grow Convexa and Compacta that get progressively bigger. There are a lot of different sizes of these Japanese hollies. Despite the name, Ilex crenata, Japanese holly, grows across quite a bit of Eastern Asia. Does grow in Japan, but also Korea, China. So it's pretty widespread, and they do grow different sizes depending on the selection. This is one, Drops of Gold. The breeder was Ron Burns. It was introduced by Star Plants from Connor Pyle maybe a decade ago, a little less than a decade ago. And we've got 3 plants in here, so you can kind of see how it grows, kind of loose and open and widespreading. We've got it out in a lot of sun, so it's really getting kind of good conditions for this growth. Most evergreen hollies that are gold leaves, and there are several of them, they'll only be gold in the sun. You start shading them much at all, and they turn green. So that's why if you look at the interior branches, it'll all be green. It's just when they're shaded out. So if you buy an evergreen holly that with gold leaves, you say, I'm going to put this in a shady spot to brighten up that shady spot, it's not going to happen. It's going to turn green. So I did make notes of when all these were planted, just because that's people always gives you a good sense of growth rate. So we planted these in 2009 as 1 gallon plants. So not real quick. We haven't pruned on them. We don't have deer, so the deer haven't eaten them. You know, in the right spot, I think this is pretty nice. I don't know if you want it as a foundation plant. It's a little looser than a lot of people want. They want that meatball effect. But it is a nice plant. Now, Ilex crenata, I'm not sure if this is male or female, but Ilex crenata has a small black fruit, so it's not a showy plant in fruit. So it hadn't been worth getting in there and looking at the flowers. I do try to notice the flowers on hollies when they come into flower. I didn't mention it at the beginning, but hollies are dioecious, meaning they're separate male and female plants. So if you want berries, you got to get a female plant, and you have to have male pollinators. If you live out in the woods, a lot of the evergreen, larger shrubby types with red fruit are native Ilex opaca, which is growing out in the woods naturally, is often a good enough pollinator for it, so you can get but it is something that if you really are growing for fruit, you should make sure you get males that flower at the same time. A lot of times they'll say, you know, this Southern Gentleman for some of the deciduous ones is a good pollinator for winter gold that we'll look at. It isn't that Southern Gentleman is a good pollinator for that plant. It's that Southern Gentleman and winter gold flower at the same time, and you have hollies can flower early, mid, late season depending on the type. You don't have to worry about that with Japanese hollies because the fruit doesn't look like much anything anyway. Like most hollies that we grow, they're pretty adaptable in terms of soils. Evergreen plants, if they're in really dry spots in windy areas, you can get leaf burn on them, especially during the winter. But otherwise, you know, kind of they love a moist, well-drained, slightly acidic soil, but they're pretty adaptable to most areas except for really sitting in wet. Some that we'll look at do tolerate wetter soils. Any questions? All right, I'm gonna stick this in my pocket because we're gonna look at a couple more gold Japanese hollies, and you'll see what kind of a difference there can be within a pretty narrow range within a genus. I can keep going. Oh, this is like having a stadium scene. Okay, the next plant is this one right above me, around me. I'll shake it for those in the back. When we talk about deciduous holly, ones that lose their leaves, most people think of the winterberry types, the shrubby plants that you multi-stemmed, but there are deciduous tree hollies. This is Ilex micrococa, and it can grow to 60 or 70 feet in the wild. Typically grows as a single trunked plant. You see, it's you know, if you were to walk by this and not really be paying attention, you could think this was a cherry, or, you know, really looks like something in the rose family, Amelanchier, something like that. You know, we're still, you know, this is one we don't know a whole lot about. I've been looking it up and trying to get some good information on it, and you know, there isn't a whole lot other than it has red fruits if you have a male and female. We have a lot of hollies. So far it has not pollinated this, assuming we have a female, which I'm not sure about. Now, a lot of times people get confused with hollies, how to identify them. You know, we have some other plants that look like them. We looked at the Japanese holly, right? You know, when they're plain green, people sometimes can't tell the difference between them and a boxwood. You know, we have another plant, Osmanthus, we call false holly often because it has the spiny leaves, some species like a holly. How do you tell them apart? Osmanthus has opposite leaves, holly has alternate leaves, which also means then that since boxwoods are not hollies, boxwoods have opposite leaves. And that is how I have to do it. I don't really remember that. I never remember that hollies have alternate leaves. I remember Osmanthus opposite, so yeah, boxwoods are the same, yeah, that kind of thing. But that's a good way to tell, to remember when you're looking at a plant and be able to identify the two. I wish I could tell you more about Ilex micrococa, but there isn't a lot in the literature about it. We got this one from Atlanta Botanic Garden, from one of their wild collections, as a 3-inch pot in 2011. So it's going pretty good. It's growing pretty well. Questions?
What is this fruit on that tree?
What is this fruit? That is no, that's not a holly. So
let her try it.
that's right. The question was asked about these trees right here. We got a couple of different ones. These are citrus. They're hybrid citrus. I don't know if there's anything low enough for me to reach. But they're hybrids with Poncirus, the hardy orange, and some different citrus, maybe mostly grapefruit kind of derived. Some of these are kind of complex hybrids. They're beautiful plants. They fruit very, very heavily for us. Fruit are not palatable. They're very, very bitter. Have very, very thick rinds to them. But they've been growing great here for years. They survived single digits multiple times and have done well. We planted a bunch of citrus as fillers, and when we first planted out here, back in 2009 and 2010, and they have survived.
So
We did.
when it doesn't snow, you can use them as snowballs?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Are
They would
very
hurt.
Thorny?
Pardon?
Are they very thorny?
They're thorny. Yes. Yes. They're kind of neat. Yeah.
Can those fruit be used to ward off insects or something? It seems to me when I went to the, I don't know if it was Joel Lane House or one of those, they said that colonials used to use them.
All right. Now, not this.
Okay.
Okay, that's a good question about them warding off insects and being used in colonial times. That's Osage orange,
Okay.
Maclura pomifera, which is not actually a true citrus, but they get fruit that superficially look like an orange. They're actually really cool when you kind of pull them apart, if you can. It's incredibly dense wood, great big heavy things. You don't want to stand under them in a windstorm. They will kill you.
They're very warty.
Yeah, kind of warty fruits, kind of lime green, and then they'll kind of darken up. But those will keep away supposedly like spiders and all kinds of insects. I've never tried it myself, but I've heard it for ages and ages. Anybody ever tried Osage oranges?
Some recent research is not so positive on it. I don't know what insects they were trying to repel, but
Science ruins everything.
You have nothing and be better than nothing.
There you go. You can always throw it at a spider.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not going to talk a whole lot about this plant, but this is Ilex crenata Soft Touch. This is a gold sport from Ilex crenata Soft Touch. It doesn't have, as far as I know at this point, it doesn't have an actual cultivar name on it. Yeah, it'll probably get something like Midas Touch. You know, plant people like to use, you know, kind of the same naming conventions for horses and dogs and, you know, show dogs and things like that. So Soft Touch, Midas Touch, whatever. But if I were to say, hey, you know, you should plant a gold Japanese holly, these are two very different animals that I have here. You know, one has very tiny leaves, very small tight habit. One of them much larger leaves, much broader habit. So you can see that there's, here for those in the back, these are the two. You know, very different kind of things. Don't know a whole lot about this. This is found by a local nursery, wholesale nursery. Let's see, we planted it as a 3-gallon in 2016. So it hadn't been in the ground for nearly as long as that other one. So we'll see what it does, but it stays nice and tight. Soft Touch is a nice small Ilex crenata, and you would think if it's gold foliage, it's going to be slower than typical. So, but kind of a neat plant. I'm really looking forward to them getting a name on this and getting out and being something. I think it's got some real potential. Don't pay so much attention to the coloration, because this actually is a really gold holly in full sun. This is another one found by North Carolina nurseryman, Pat McCracken, and this is kind of right in between these other ones in terms of leaf size and kind of growth habit. I actually think this is probably the one that's kind of the best of the bunch. So it's Ilex crenata Adorned. We planted this one in 2006. How did we get it? We got it as a cutting in 2006. Been very, very tight, very, very bright gold. Even in shade, it has stayed tight. But when you get it out planted in full sun, it's really bright gold. And I really just did these three so you see just what kind of variation you can have for this.
Is this available?
This is at least somewhat available. Yeah, just look for Ilex Adorned. The name, yeah, I said they're like horses and dogs. This is a sport from Ilex crenata Hugendorn, a European selection. So it is adorned. That's where it gets that name. All right, you walk through the Arboretum here, right? And you read all the labels and you know that we know everything about all the plants, right? You know, so every once in a while you may notice a label like one on this that says Ilex. Because we have no idea what it is. So, you know, what do you do with plants that you don't know what they are? You know, you get them in front of other experts to ask them about it. You know, people like the National Arboretum, right? They should know everything. Well, guess where we got this plant? From the National Arboretum as Ilex. It's a wild collected form. It came from a nursery in Japan, but it was collected by that nurseryman in China. So, you know, this is the problem when you get things secondhand. We're not even sure exactly where in China it was collected. But it's been a really beautiful shrub for us. The stems are kind of burgundy, purpley, new growth. You can see a little bit of the coloration here. New growth comes out with a burgundy flush. It takes on some burgundy tints in winter. Seems to be semi-evergreen, tardily deciduous, somewhere in between. In a mild winter, it'll keep most of its leaves. In a really cold winter, it'll lose most of its leaves, but it's not quite sure. A lot of times that's good, because sometimes these things that try to hold on to the leaves can suffer when we have a cold winter. We have had it in the ground since 2010. Is that right? Yeah, 2010 as a 1-gallon plant, and you know, this is a perfect growing conditions for plants. So it's been a good size. You know, I think it is just absolutely beautiful. But when you start talking to nurserymen about it, you know, I show this to nurserymen, and they say, "Well, okay, but I can't tell. You know, I can't tell somebody it flowers well." And I say, "But you sell a lot of boxwoods and Japanese hollies." And he's like, "Well, and it's not exactly evergreen, you know, and it's a good size, but it isn't tight enough and dense enough. You know, it didn't look like a meatball." And so it's kind of this. Everybody who looks at it says it's a really beautiful plant, but nobody can sell it because it's kind of almost an ethereal kind of a quality to it. I really like it. Either we don't have something that pollinates it, or we have a male plant, because we haven't seen fruit on there. And you know, those flowers on hollies are mostly inconspicuous, and you really got to go out of your way to look at the flowers closely when it's in flower. And I wish my job allowed me to go around and look at holly flowers all day, but they make me do other things. Just beautiful plant, and I wanted to show it because there are an awful lot of these types of plants where we just don't know a whole lot about it, or anything in some cases. You know, hopefully we keep talking to folks in the Holly Society. Every time we have some sort of expert, we ask them about it, and so far they, you know, you can tell it's a taxonomist when they say, "Where'd it come from?" because they want to go look in the flora and pick it out. I'm like, well, it doesn't matter where it comes from. What is it? Yeah. You'll catch me asking where it came from. Yeah, got it.
Might it have a tighter form if it was in brighter light?
It might have a tighter form if it was in brighter light. For an awful lot of its time, this was not this big, and so it was getting, you know, pretty good sun. The sun comes up over this way. It should be getting enough light within the lath house to do what it does, because most everything else does. But some of these other plants that are growing around that have started shading it certainly would be affecting it. But just when you look at the way the growth habit goes, you think it's pretty similar to what this.
Yeah, the lath house, it's got special capabilities.
Right.
Light. What's magical?
All right. Some of you may have heard this before, but so bear with me, because I do like talking about it. Okay, the difference between the lath house and, say, a shade cloth is that the sun, you get 100% sun intensity on the leaf for brief periods of time. So take something that needs full sun. Flowering perennials, for instance, do wonderfully in here because they get full intense sun, where they can really photosynthesize. But then, before the leaf can burn, the sun has moved and it gets shaded, and it gets completely shaded. When you're under shade cloth, you get the same level of light intensity all day. You don't get that really intense sunlight and then the cooling. And that's when plants burn in the sun, it's usually that they're just getting too hot, and the cells, you disrupt the cell membranes, and they burst, and you get, you know, browning, or you get burning on there. And so you don't get that on here because it heats up, gets that intensity, but cools down, so the tissue never gets so hot. So that's why it runs this way. If it ran this way and the sun went over this way, it would, you know, there's some plants that would get sunlight all day, some parts of the leaf, and some that would never get the sun. So you do have to make sure you're going north and south, so when the sun is going east to west, it is getting that. And it took us a while to get this spacing figured out. We had snow fencing on the original lath house, and it really worked well, the spacing on there. And we had that same spacing here, and then we realized we were going from things that were, what, a quarter inch, not even thick, to something that's 2 inches thick. And that changes how much light gets through. And so all of a sudden we had to do math, which not great. Good thing we had architects and we could explain what we were trying to do, and they got it worked out for us. But
So this is the first one in the country, so to speak?
well, you know, there are other lath houses, and I'm sure there are lath houses made of the 2x2s.
I mean, you're learning, it looks like about a 2-to-1 ratio.
It is close to a 2-to-1 ratio. It's a little bit different than that, but it's pretty close to a 2-to-1 ratio. It was 2011 we were designing it, so I don't remember exactly, but it's something pretty close to that.
Is that affected by the change of the direction?
The
Seasons.
seasons, well, you know, it is designed for kind of high summer
Sure.
to be as effective as can be then.
How would that compare when you see dappled shade, the true dappled shade?
Well, dappled shade is similar. A lot of times, if you'll see in something I like to say, you'll see it in a lot of literature. You say this is great under high shade, which is really another way of saying dappled shade, where you don't have, you know, you have pines that are up high. The sun, as it moves through, you tend to get more light through there, and it's the same thing. This is just a little bit more regular in what it gets, what gets through, because you have dappled shade. Some areas may never get sun, but areas that do, it'll kind of move over time. But yeah.
To identification with DNA barcoding, would that be a candidate for?
Question is DNA barcoding. Yes and no. It's an inexact science. It's not like a fingerprint with DNA. First off, it would have to be in the library, you know, in the DNA library, what this is. And then, you know, plants are, you know, you can get some hollies that are pretty similar to each other. So it's not like you get A matched with an A. It's more like you have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, you know, and then this other one is B, C, D, F, G. You know, it's not exact, but it's close enough that you can say, yeah, we think that's the same thing. With some plants, the variation between species is so distinct that you really can tell a difference. But in others, it's a little more nebulous. And you know, if this were you know, we operate kind of on two levels: the academic and research, and then the practical extension side. So something like this, academically, it'd be very interesting to be able to figure out exactly what it is. Even if we were going to introduce it, nurserymen don't care about the species. They'll just call it, you know, Ilex graceful grace, and be done with it. That's, you know, because people aren't asking for Ilex crenata, they're asking for Japanese hollies. You know? So it's kind of a little bit in between there. If it were something really new and interesting and probably commercially viable, we would probably work towards something like that, see if we can really figure it out using all available methods. As it is now, honestly, we're waiting for somebody to walk by and say, wow, that's a really nice specimen of Ilex Weathingtoni you have there. And, so until that happens. And that does, we've got a rhododendron that we have in here that had a name. I got it, actually the same nursery this came from. I got it, had a name on it when I got it. I got from a Japanese nurseryman who speaks no English. Rhododendron uync. I have never seen that name anywhere. Not even on a list of synonyms or things. Not even as a bad name. Not anything close to uync. The Magnolia Society International met here this spring. Steve Hootman is the head of the Rhododendron Species Foundation, and we were in here looking at the magnolias that are right outside. I said, "Oh, hey, Steve, this plant. What can you tell me about it?" And he said, "Oh, Rhododendron uync. That's not in this country." And he asked me to describe it, and I described the flowers. He's like, "That's it." I said, "Well, we'll propagate it for you." So. And then I just recently told him we had some plants for him if he wanted them, and which of the really big leaf rhododendron will grow out here in the southeast. So maybe we'll do some trading. He'll get a plant he can grow. We'll get some plants we can kill. Yep. Any other questions? All right. Now I'm not going to talk about it, but as we exit this evergreen plant that's kind of vertical here, that's an osmanthus, a false holly. So if you got up there and looked at that, even though that has typical holly leaves, that's one where the leaves will be opposite, and so you know it isn't a holly. They would be alternate, like on this. I'm really not just focusing on the Japanese hollies, but they're just such important landscape plants for this area that I wanted to mention some of the different forms. A real popular one from a nursery in Japan, Mr. Shibamichi introduced sky pencil holly, Japanese holly, a while back. Became very, very popular, very narrow, upright evergreen plant, tended with age to pull apart and kind of flop and whatnot. If you treated it right, it was a very good plant. Used in the right situation, it was great, but it really was pretty narrow. Kind of went out of favor, but there's been some other ones introduced. This is one called Sky Pointer. It's sold as Sky Pointer. The actual cultivar is Pharaoh 1. But Ilex Purpurea, and so this is going to grow upright, but be a little bit broader, much stiffer upright plant. I still think with age, you get an ice storm or something like that, it's going to flop a bit. But, you know, I don't think most plants are, you know, you need to replace them every now and then anyway. I know people who will, especially up north, who have these types of plants with these types of growth habits. They'll take some, you know, fishing line or something like that and kind of circle it around there a little bit just to keep it in so it doesn't flop over during the winter. That's a lot of work to me. But it's, you know, they're nice plants if you want an upright green plant. Nurserymen always tell me all it sells, color sells, and then when you go to their nurseries, they're all growing Ilex Purpurea and boxwoods, and so who knows? It's color, except for when it isn't. But they're nice plants. They, you know, tolerate some shade.
Mark,
Yeah.
when it comes to boxwood, is there a favorite boxwood you like that has that shape, narrow conical shape?
So, the question was with boxwoods, is there a favorite with the narrow conical shape? The kind of the industry standard really is probably Graham Blandy, which is a nice narrow conical one. I actually really like the old Pyramidalis. It's harder to find, but I think that's actually as nicer than Graham Blandy. But those are kind of the.
There's one called what, D something?
Derunk. That's a good one too. It's a little bit slower than the others, so it stays a little more compact. Yeah. They're boxwoods. I can show you some really nice tight camellias that stay upright. Evergreen column with flowers, you know.
They smell nice.
Yes.
I guess.
I can't smell boxwoods, so they don't bother me. I was shocked the first time somebody told me boxwood smell. I did mention deciduous hollies before, and we talked about Iris micrococa, that large deciduous holly. What's more familiar to people are the winterberry types and farkleberries and whatnot. This is Ilex verticillata winter gold, so this is one of our native deciduous hollies. We have a few different ones. This one has the berries become kind of orangey yellow instead of the typical red. It does sometimes these other colored berries help stay on the plant a little bit longer. They don't show up quite as brightly to the birds, so they're their second or third stop rather than their first ones. One of the issues people have with these a lot of times, or what you see here, is that it will sucker pretty profusely. So you can really, if you don't dig those out, you wind up with a colony rather than a plant. Also, as you can see, they get pretty large. They get 8 to 10 feet tall. and as wide, so they can get big if you don't prune on them. They're very easy to prune. Go in there, when it's dormant, and just prune out the oldest, tallest stems and kind of rejuvenate it that way. And you can dig out these suckers if you want. Some sucker worse than others, but really it's more a function of the soil. We have really nice loose soil here. We mulch. When we mulch on top of them. The lower branches, you have both suckering and layering with the branches on here. The winter berries they do naturally grow in kind of bottomland areas, so they're much more wet tolerant than a lot of the other hollies. So you can plant them in damp spots and low spots in the garden along ponds and streams, and they're really nice. In another garden I worked at, we had about 40 or 50 different ones all planted out kind of in big masses, and every year I'd go out and I'd say, okay, this is the one. This is, Maryland Red is the best fruiting one. And then I go out the next year and we're like, oh no, it's winter gold. Oh no, it's very nice. Oh, it seems like every year it just, because they flower at slightly different times and the males flower at slightly different times, whenever the conditions are ideal. If you get too much rain when this is in full flower, you don't get good fruit set that year. Even if everything else is the same, so you may have a perfect growing season and forget that for the couple weeks this was in flower, it rained every day, or there was a freeze that killed the flowers. You won't get flowers. So I encourage people, if you're planting, if you want a big mass of deciduous hollies, you love those bare stems with red fruits on them during the winter, don't go out and buy one type. Buy 3 or 4 different ones. Plant, if they're different size ones, plant the smaller ones in front, plant some bigger ones in back. There's some new ones which I hesitate to say how much I've been liking them. We're not going by them, they're kind of on the other side, but called Berry Poppins. It's awful, but despite that, they've been really large fruits, and really they've been pretty good at fruiting every year pretty well. Some years better than others, but yeah, so you can look for some of those that might be good. And I forget there's a male that was released along with that's good. And generally with all hollies, you're looking at about 1 male for every 6 to 8 females planted within 50 or 100 feet. Should be good. Any questions about deciduous hollies?
I've got some winter gold, and I noticed the same thing, which I don't remember from previous years, that there's a lot of black leaves on it. Is that like, we had a hard frost?
Yeah, I mean this is just cold damage. Yeah, it's not a big. It's nothing that'll hurt it at all.
Yeah, I just don't remember it in previous years.
In some years, the deciduous hollies can have some really nice yellow fall color. I mean, it's nothing spectacular, but it can be nice. But in other years, this is more typical. You don't grow for the fall colors at the end of the day.
I just don't remember the black leaves from other years. But...
No, that's just because it was pretty active when we got so much cold. Other questions? Yeah.
Is the wet bee tolerant? Is it also shade tolerant?
It's pretty shade tolerant. It won't flower and fruit very well, but it is shade tolerant.
Do all holly species pollinate with all the other species?
No, but they can be fairly wide crossing. I don't know. I'm sure there are some pretty good studies on what'll pollinate what, but I don't know exactly. But all hollies won't pollinate all hollies. The going from deciduous to evergreen is pretty tough. And there are some different groups of hollies, and you'd probably have better luck in between those. But a lot of times it has to do with timing, one, just physically, but then just some are not going to be compatible with others. But there are an awful lot of natural hybrids, so you do get some of that. And I'll point out some natural hybrids.
Mark, what's the one behind you?
Oh, back there, that little plant and flower, that's a Prunus incisa, the cut leaf cherry. Prunus incisa, that's probably Shikazaki or something like that. But I'm not entirely sure which is the cultivar name. But Prunus incisa is a really great little small leaf flowering cherry. It's generally the earliest to flower. This is very early. Usually you get them in the new year starting, but and I haven't paid enough attention to this one to know if it flowers this early every year or not. But yeah, they take very, very little chilling to get going, and they're great plants. They're small cherries, more shrubby than tree-like, although there's some that are more trees than others. The Japanese love them. They're great for flowering when nothing else does. They're fairly indistinct at other times of the year, which it's better than being ugly at other times of the year. But yeah, but it's not unusual for it to be flowering like that. I've talked about this on other tours, but I don't think I've done it on a Plantsman's tour. I may be wrong. You can correct me if I have. Every year there's a trade show for Johnston County nurserymen over at the fairgrounds, and for that show I always at like after lunch I'll do a tour around all the nursery booths, and they'll all have one or two plants for me to talk about, and they'll send me a list ahead of time, and generally it's things that I know. Maybe it's the newest cultivar of Nandina or something like that, but nothing shocking. So one year I got this, it was Ilex attenuata NASA. I said, I've never seen this, never heard of it. Did some research on it, and it's Ilex attenuata is a naturally occurring hybrid here in the U.S. Occurs between Ilex opaca, the American holly, what we think of as the traditional holly, and Ilex cassini, the Dahoon holly, which is kind of like related to Ilex vomitoria. And this one is called NASA because it was actually found on some NASA property in Alabama by the Dodds, who've introduced some great native plants, Dodd Nurseries. And I got in touch with them, and they said, oh yeah, it's a great plant, real narrow leaves. Unfortunately, it's a male and it only grows about 4 feet tall. So I talked about it at the trade show, and then one of the nurserymen sent me a picture of Ilex NASA growing by his house, about 10 feet tall, full of red fruit. So I don't know, maybe it just doesn't like Alabama. But I've really, this is not a new plant, but it's new to me just a couple years ago, and I've just really taken with this. Makes a upright pyramidal plant. If you know Foster's holly, Foster's number 2, this is the same parentage. This has a narrower leaf. Instead of having a couple of serrations or teeth, it's really almost toothless. If you run your fingers along there, you can feel a little bit of a kind of a crenate edge to it. Kind of soft. It will fruit. Has not fruited heavily for us yet, but seems to grow really well. Makes a nice shape without any pruning. I really like it, and I think I got so excited about it that I think some of the nurserymen who apparently had grown it years previously started getting a little bit more excited about it too. I've noticed it popping up in a few more catalogs. I hope landscapers and such get excited about it and plant it, because I do think it's a great texture for a plant. It's very fine for an upright plant like this.
How old is that?
I can tell you exactly. It was a 5-gallon plant in 2015, but it was a pretty short. It was a pretty short 5-gallon plant. So, which is why we like to plant them small. When you plant big, it takes them longer to establish and get going. I think you get a better sense of growth rate when you plant a smaller one. But, yeah. All right, no, I'm not talking about this one. I'm talking about this one. The trunk on this side. So, this is Ilex Purpurea. Again, this tree right here. Doesn't have the most beautiful shape because there was another holly right here that we lost, so it's kind of one-sided. This is the peach leaf holly. I'd say that deciduous holly looks more like a peach leaf than this, but kind of an interesting holly. It's got these not quite serrations along the edge of the evergreen leaves. Grows as a single trunk tree, 30, 40, 50 feet tall. What is its real claim to fame is it is one of the showiest hollies in flower. It's got kind of lavender pink flowers, and it'll flower very heavily in the spring. If it's female, it'll get red berries after that, not purple berries, despite the name. The purpurea is for the flowers. But really, people miss it, but if you walk by here in the spring, look up, because it'll often be just absolutely covered in flowers, and really, really beautiful. At one point, this was, I wouldn't say a popular plant, but it was a little bit more widely grown. And about once every 3, 4, 5 years, I'll get somebody who comes in with a branch in flower and says, "What is this?" And it always stumps me for about an hour or two, and then I'm like, yes, get the email. Ilex Purpurea, just because it really is fairly showy. Actually, at this point, I've gotten so used to looking at it that I can usually get it pretty quickly. But I always think of it as some sort of laurel at first. It almost always grows as a single trunk. You really got to work at it to get multiple trunks. Makes a pretty quick grower. This is an old plant. Yeah, it predated us, so I'm not sure when it was planted. Predated our good records anyway. Comes from Asia, but really a lovely tree. Any questions?
Looks like it's. Go ahead.
You go.
Oh, I was just going to say right above you, a lot of sprouts coming up. So it looks like it wants to form a lower crown in response to the sun.
Yeah.
What is that little plant? The one right in front of you.
The one right in front of us. This is another holly. It's what I'm standing on. And I cannot remember which one it was. I'd have to go back and look at our records. Anybody remember? Any volunteers? Staff?
It's gorgeous though.
Yeah.
At that size.
I cannot. Yeah, beautiful at this size. It was a.
Some kind of perennial.
Yeah, I can't remember what it was. It might have been Lydia Morris, but I do not remember. This is atypical growth because this is, it's got this massive root system and it's pushing up suckers. So this is extremely vigorous growth. But I do not remember which one it was. Other questions? All right.
What about this?
Yeah, what is
Oh yeah, we talked about this.
that's a holly.
This is, so I mentioned the Dodds, Tom Dodd, when I was talking about NASA. The Dodds did some breeding work a while back with hollies. They were some of the ones who introduced some of the so-called red hollies, the oak leaf and Oakland and all of those. There's a bunch that were really never nothing much was done with. There's a beautiful one called Patricia Dodd on the corner of the McSwain Center as you're coming down from the parking lot. Great big plant. I think it's gorgeous. This is another one of theirs, Patricia Varner. I would guess just from looking at it that this is Ilex opaca crossed with Ilex dahoon or something similar. So an attenuata type back crossed with Ilex opaca. Kind of restrained size from the dahoon parent, but the leaf is like a small Ilex opaca, but it could have any one of a number of Asian relatives in its parentage as well. Patricia Varner is not, as far as I know, really much in the trade. It's generally a pretty good fruiter for us. Definitely good size fruits, definitely good color. Some of the things you look for in holly fruits, there are some that have kind of the fruit aren't glossy, they're kind of matte, so they don't show up as well. This isn't as glossy as some, but it's still pretty nice. Foliage retains dark green. Basically what I'm doing is describing this plant here because I've never grown it anywhere else. I've seen it once before, about the same. Don't know how old this is, but I'm guessing it's I know it's older than 10 years because it's 11 years because it predates me. But it is a really nice plant. I think it kind of went unnoticed a little bit when this other holly was here. You can see this holly was kind of blocking it a little bit, but beautiful plant.
All those red hollies, do you have experience in which ones the best berries, the most berries?
They're kind of like the deciduous hollies. Each year it's a little bit different. We have a bunch planted out, and I didn't go up there just because it's hard to get into, but right along Barrel Road, where the parking lot is, if you go into that kind of underutilized area right there and look along the road, we have a whole series of them right there. And they really kind of shot themselves in the foot. They released a ton of those red hollies, which, one, they shouldn't have called them red hollies because the new growth being red was at best. But they also just released too many. They should have really reduced them. One of my favorite hollies for berry production is, it's kind of a bat orange color, is one from the National Arboretum called Venus, which has a kind of a broader leaf, narrow pyramidal form, but it just produces a ton of fruit. Kind of similar to the older clusterberry, which same thing. The branches are all just covered in fruit. I like both of those for fruit production. There's another one from the National Arboretum called Cherry Bomb, which we have one in the mixed border, which was a little bit shaded out. I'm hoping it'll really come into its own now that we took out the Nellie Stevens hedge, which has great big glossy fruit. Real popular, fairly popular in Texas. Hasn't seemed to catch on anywhere else, but it is a great plant. It really should be more widely grown. And it's a non-spiny one, which I like. I mentioned Japanese hollies. I mentioned English hollies. This is your pretty typical Chinese holly. I'd have to get it back in there and look at which one it is particular, but Ilex cornuta. Cornuta means horn, I think coronet, that kind of thing. And it's because it has these really pronounced spines on there. And Ilex cornuta is generally one of the more prickly, unpleasant ones to garden with, but they're beautiful. And I mentioned the thicker, more spiny the leaves are, the more deer resistant it is. This is pretty deer resistant. Also with Ilex cornuta, in the best forms like this, you get very large, very nice colored red fruit. So it is showy. As Chris mentioned, Chris just got through his putting on the wreath workshop this past weekend. It is a vicious plant to try and put into a wreath. You got to grab it. Those thorns are in all different directions, so it's hard to grab it without grabbing those thorns. They're great plants. A lot of times the ones you see are like Burford and Burfordina, which are have basically gotten rid of the spines and just have the spine at the tip, so more of an oval leaf with one spine at the tip. A little bit easier to work with. Be careful though, because even dwarf Burford, sounds like it's a dwarf, a sucker will get big over time. That's not that dwarf. There's some other ones that kind of do the same thing, like Fine Line, and there's one with a French name, something Denset, but I can't remember what it is. But they're all really good, but beautiful. I will also point out this little Ilex Carolina Cardinal. This is a JC Raulston Arboretum introduction. If I remember correctly, and somebody can tell me if I am wrong, but what I was told was this was a plant that a nurseryman gave to JC and to say, hey, what do you think about this plant? JC lost the person who gave it to him, and the plant became disassociated somehow. But it's like, it's a great plant, so put a name on it, Carolina Cardinal. It's almost certainly a Ilex verticillata serrata hybrid. Just when you look at it, the structure, it's got a lot of similarities with serrata in its habit and the fruit size and whatnot, but it also has some verticillata characteristics too. So pretty sure it's a hybrid between those two.
So this is 20 years old.
Well, I don't know if this one is. I don't.
I think it's been here since I've been here.
Has it? It may be. Is it on the back? Nothing. I'd have to look it up.
I think the other one was a JC introduction too. Wasn't that a South Korea collection?
Is
maybe?
it? I can't remember which one.
Something like
one
maybe
is.
early fruiting.
Let me see if I.
I'm forgetting the name myself.
There's a sign about 3 feet in front of the truck. It says Ilex.
That's for the small shrub to the top left of it.
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I had to look it up.
Like
on a
September
map.
Fire or something.
What?
But September
Correct.
Fire.
September Fire. It could be.
I'm really forgetting, but I think it was.
I got
supposed to be
to. I
early
got to
fruiting.
admit, the Ilex cornutas, they're just so unpleasant to work with that I don't pay that much attention to them. They're beautiful to look at.
I've
Mark, is
had
that a holly?
flocks
Is
of
that a
cedar.
holly over there?
Yeah, I'll talk about that in a minute.
I've had flocks of cedar waxwings just come and stay for a couple days until they just clean off all the berries.
Yeah, that's when we had where I had all the deciduous hollies. Yeah, the cedar waxwings love holly fruits, and they'll hang out until they get every last berry on there. It's really neat.
Yeah.
Talking about this one, because this is the one that shows up on all those deer-resistant lists. This is Ilex John T. Morris. I'm not sure who produces it, but it is a hybrid between Ilex cornuta, and if this isn't spiny enough, there's another species, Ilex Purpurea, which is even spinier. This is a hybrid between the two. This is actually less spiny than either of them, but it always winds up on those lists or often on deer tolerant lists. So maybe it's better. It's a male. Always gets very confusing when they name them after males, like John Morris, and it's a female plant. Really throws me off. Luckily they didn't with this. So you don't get the fruit. It's, that's probably sold in the nursery industry as a 6 to 8 foot plant. It'll get bigger with time. I don't know if maybe have a. Yeah, I don't have a date on this, but I probably, as a small plant, I would probably say, it's kind of nice once it gets big, though. And you can limit up and can see in there. They are great for nesting birds. Oh, and this is great. Is that fruit on there? Fruit on this male plant? No, that's from up there. I was hoping to look at one male and see some fruit on there. We talk about plants as being monoecious, where they have male and female flowers on the same plant, and dioecious, where they have male and female flowers on separate plants. It's not that simple. If you go out and look at holly flowers, like in the wild where there are populations, what you get is a swarm. You get mostly male, mostly female plants, but you do get kind of a continuum. So there are a lot of times people say, oh, this plant is parthenocarpic, meaning it makes fruit without actually being pollinated. It'll, it's a female plant. If you just have it, it'll make fruit. A lot of times it's not really that they're parthenocarpic, truly. What it is it's self-fertile, and it'll have some female, a female that'll have some male flowers, or vice versa. It really is, plants are not, well, I was going to say not quite as settled as people. I don't think people are that settled either. I think it's a continuum, but plants can also change. We have a Chinese fringe tree that had been male The flowers are male, and it's real easy to distinguish a male fringe tree from a female when it's in flower. And after the 2007 drought, the next year, it was loaded with fruit. You know, plants can change based on stress. Aroids, Erasemas, jack-in-the-pulpits, those will be male flowering for years until the bulb gets big enough and you get big enough size, and then they'll convert to either female or male and female on the same plant, and you get fruit. A lot of times, if that depletes a lot of the energy, it'll go back to being all male flowers the next year. So it can, you know, it's. We like to say things are cut and dry, but they're not at all. So you will sometimes, on a plant like this that is a male, and we know it's a male, you will sometimes get a handful of fruit on there. Let's look at some of the older plants in the Arboretum. We've got 3 great hollies in here. One is Ilex Purpurea. I'm not sure which one is which. Right up top, I think this one's Ilex Purpurea. All the way up there we have Ilex attenuata. That's that Ilex Purpurea Dahun Ilex Cassini hybrid. And then a Nellie Stevens. Did I get that wrong? Which one is this one? This is Purpurea, yeah. And then Ilex Nellie Stevens, which was a hybrid. It's what our hedges, most of our holly hedges were planted with. These were all in the 15 to 18 foot range in 1988. That's the earliest we have size records for them. So big plants when you just let them go and don't shear them, and they can be really beautiful things. They probably need to go at some point and let a little light in here and let us grow some other things. But it is kind of neat to be able to see these great old plants. Went and saw the national champion Ilex Purpurea. It's in a cemetery, and probably take 4 people to put their arms around the trunk. It's just massive plants. So you know, even Nellie Stevens, people say, you know, it makes a pyramidal hedge, but you know, it makes a big beautiful tree as well. So I just wanted to end here with some of these larger ones, since we looked at a lot of little guys as well. Any questions about hollies or anything else? Yes.
It seems like mine in my yard, and they're all planted by birds for the most part. So I don't know what they are. I mean, just some native ones and some with shiny leaves and pointy and everything. But it seems like every other year they have good fruit set. Is that just probably the climate was good one year and not good the next year, or is there anything to that?
So there's some plants. The question was, you know, fruiting, just naturally occurring ones, you know, fruiting kind of every other year, fruiting well. There are some plants that have, they call mast years, whether it's a showy fruit like a berry or acorns. You know, some years you'll be, you know, ankle deep in acorns. You know, that. And like apples will tend to fruit heavily one year and then less heavily the next year. However, if you thin the apples on the heavy years, which you would do commercially, that balances out and you'll get more apples the next year. It seems to be for some plants, and I don't know with hollies, it seems to be more of a energy, you know, that expends a lot of energy and maybe it takes a year to catch up. Now, I don't know if that's the case. Like I said, with the deciduous hollies, where I was really looking at a wide range of them, it just seemed like some years were better for other years than other years. So if you're looking at a bunch in your woodlands that are naturally occurring, it may be that they're on alternate cycle years. It may be that some are fruiting heavily one year, some other ones a different year, other ones the next year. And so it just seems like you're getting this sporadic. Or it could be that they all fruit really heavily because the weather's been nice, or there's been rain, cold, whatever on another year. It's kind of hard to say. But I've never heard about hollies really having kind of a heavy production versus then light production. You have?
No, I don't either. I was going to ask about something totally off topic. We walked by a gold-twigged ash tree back there, and I'm wondering if you're going to be treating any of your Oleaceae in anticipation of the borer.
Yeah, great question. Asking about the emerald ash borer as it moves this way, if we're going to be treating things. The short answer is no. Just because of money, because we're evaluating things. We actually, as ashes were declining in the Midwest, we actually started planting some more ashes, to see if there are going to be ones that are more resistant than others. I think in terms of our ashes, I think we're going to be okay in general in this area because we don't have many ashes in the area. Unfortunately, the emerald ash borer has jumped to other members of the Oleaceae family, so that is fringe tree, Kyananthus, as you're talking about, and the dagger through my heart, Osmanthus. They've been found on Osmanthus, and we have some great big old Osmanthus around Raleigh that I'm sure will be hit. The short answer is no. The longer answer is we hope when it comes time to that, we hope to work with the entomology department and use the collection as a basis for some research. But yeah, it's coming. The crepe myrtle scale is coming. It's all coming. And it can come.
That's a good or a bad thing.
Yeah, and it can come quick.
Yes,
I was a couple years ago. I was in Norfolk at the old botanic garden I worked at, and they had just planted out a alley of crepe myrtles, and I was with somebody from Texas who is dealing with crepe myrtle scale, and he immediately saw scale there, and those were just all plants that they had gotten locally, but they had all come from the West Coast with scale on them. So they got rid of them and destroyed them, worked with the extension service to make sure they were in good shape. But that just illustrates that just because it's 1,000 miles away one day doesn't mean the next day it can't be right there, because we live in a time and a place where things move around pretty quickly.
Cape Fear Botanical Gardens, we were there this weekend. They have a big, several hundred
Of
camellias.
Oh, camellia scale. Yeah, camellia scale that's all over the place. And whenever you have that many camellias, we had same thing in Norfolk. We had camellias like that, and yeah, just that scale's bad.
Will hollies that naturally seed themselves look like the parents?
Will hollies that do that? If you have an American holly, Ilex Purpurea, when it seeds, it will come back fairly true. Now, if you have a name selection, like maybe there's one that has super glossy leaves and larger fruits, there's no telling that the offspring how much they'll resemble the parent. Anytime you're growing from seed, you're going to get some variation. Is kind of the bottom line. And any of the cultivars and hybrids, those are going to they can come back looking like just about anything.
Will there be any hybridizing? Because I've got a lot of the native ones in my yard, but I've also got a lot that have really shiny, really thick, spiny leaves on them with a lot of good berries that humans didn't plant them in my yard. The birds did. I don't know so is that hybrids, you think, or just
it depends. Hollies are so widely grown as landscape plants that birds are moving around. They could be moving. They could be Ilex cornuta hybrids that they're moving around. They could be our native Ilex opaquas. They could be hybrids. There's part of the reason why there's so many. There are hundreds and hundreds of cultivars because they do hybridize very easily and they have good variability in them.
One last question is the fragrance. I know you're probably not the best person to ask it. You keep saying you can't smell anything, but I have a holly in my yard, a couple of hollies in my yard that the birds planted, and every year when they're in bloom, it's heavenly. I like it as well as the Osmanthus.
There actually are some hollies that I can smell that really are very, very sweetly fragrant when they flower, and since they're usually flowering when there isn't a lot else going on, they can be really, really very nice. I never see resources that really talk about the fragrance of specific ones, but yeah, they can be very nice, and the
pollinators are
the
all
pollinators over. Love them. They're great for pollinators. There's a specific solitary bee that that hollies are one of its major sources of food. But they're covered in pollinators when they're in flower.
What about Possum Hall Holly? Is that a true holly?
Possum Hall holly? Yes. Yeah.
Does it grow around here?
It does. And that's help me out with the species of
Ilex decidua?
decidua. Yeah.
It is a deciduous one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ilex decidua. We have Ilex verticillata, Ilex decidua, and there's another one of the major deciduous ones. It's gone, but yeah. And then the Japanese Ilex serrata is the other one you see in landscapes. Yeah. And then there are some minor ones too. Other questions? All right.
Thank you.
Thank y'all all very much.